Okay, today I have the great pleasure of getting a chance to talk to a friend of mine. His name's Jesse Terry. We first got to know each other when I was in Berlin for a visit to Ableton. He was there about to move to Berlin, if I recall right, and he spent some time out there. He's since come back to the States. He is the man behind most of the controllers that we've all grown to love. He's I don't know. I'll let you describe your position, but what I would say is that you've been in a designer role with an awful lot of hardware. So with that, Jesse, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Darwin.
Yeah. Why don't you start off by explaining exactly what your role is and some of the things that you've worked on?
Sure. So I'm the product owner for hardware at Ableton, and I think some of the things I've worked on in the past is I worked on the APC 40. That was the first hardware project I worked on, along with the guys at Akai, and specifically Glenn Darcy, who's now at Arturia. And then from there, I worked on Ableton Push, and now more recently Push 2. And it was a winding road to get to the place to work on those projects, but it's been a lot of fun, and it's also my passion in my free time to use those things. It's a dream job in many ways.
Sure. So I'm kind of curious. One of the things I like doing is kind of diving into people's background, and I know that you have a background as a player and musician, and I'm kind of curious how you bring that forward and end up becoming a product. The product owner has a big role in the design creation, right?
Sure. I work as both a product owner, sort of prioritizing what kind of features go into it and defining the vision of a product, and then I'm also interested in the small details of it. So I do design a lot of some of the smaller features of the products and work with a team of designers to figure out exactly how it's all going to work.
Got it.
And I think, for me, a big part of it is, so I'm a musician by training. I played guitar all my life, and that led me from playing in rock and metal in high school to learning and studying jazz for a while, and getting into electronic music and hip hop. And for my education, I studied classical composition, which pretty much never came in useful to me at all until designing the grid of Push and the layout for how you can play notes and melodies there.
Sure.
And
right.
I think it's like I studied it so you don't have to in some ways. But I guess it was I think that the most interesting part for me is getting into the details of guitar and harmony. That's the stuff that really got me into it early on. And then since, in the last, 15 years, it's been more of a transition over to making music with computers and drum machines and synthesizers and that sort of stuff.
So I'm kind of actually interested because that sounds like an arc kind of similar to mine. First of all, what was it that propelled you from heavy metal and rock into jazz? Was it the difficulty of it? Was it the more depth to harmony and stuff, or was it a particular player that caught your attention?
I guess around age 12, I was into more of the hardcore and punk areas of rock, and something got me into, probably the early Metallica albums got me into shredding, and I was a terrible shredder in all the worst kind of ways. Mullets and shaved sides and back of the head, Steinberger guitars, all these really awful directions. And I think, through that, I always had a love of Hendrix and things like that. But then I guess it was Wes Montgomery probably that got me, and Grant Green. And this stuff, I think, also changed the way I was, I was into hip hop all that time too. So sort of hearing how the samples of one of these measures of a jazz album can turn into a hip hop track, that all got me very interested in it as well. So in collecting jazz, and I still listen to a lot of jazz, not so much metal, but and through that, I guess, through hip hop, got into electronic music as well, and became a music reviewer. Actually, that was my job for quite a while. Was reviewing all kinds of music. So.
Yeah, who are you reviewing for?
I was reviewing for some dead internet companies, and then for some magazines like Accelerator magazine.
Oh yeah, right.
And I became their technology editor for a while, and that sort of led me to Ableton. I started to review gear, and I think it was Ableton Live 2, and I wrote some nice complimentary reviews, and that caught the ears of some people at Ableton. And so I started a relationship with them, and moved from San Francisco out to New York to join Dave Hill, who I guess you had on your show not too long ago.
Not too long ago, that's right. So I'm curious about that kind of transition. So what is it, first of all, that swung the door open for you to be able to do a review, have a review job? Was it just when there was all kinds of online companies and they were looking for anyone? Or did you have a specific in on it? Or did you have some writing chops that you needed to exercise?
I think I thought I had writing chops. And I mean, I think that's part of the promise of a liberal arts education is you become good at writing. And, I could write okay, but my editor's there, and that was listen.com, which I guess got turned into real networks and other things along the way. And, and also at CNET, I wrote there for a while.
Oh, okay.
And they had kind of a farm of people writing 30-word reviews of different artists every day.
Oh, wow.
And I had some very patient editors who showed me maybe I wasn't as good of a writer as I thought I was, in kind and gentle ways. And they did hone my writing to a better place, I think. And then really, Accelerator really helped me a lot too, with a great editor there. So it's always these great editors, and then books like On Writing is a great one to sort of get your writing to a place where you write as few words as possible. You sort of take a Hemingway approach to writing a clearer version of what you thought you were writing, I think. So the musical part wasn't really a problem. I feel like I always was obsessed with records and bought hundreds of CDs and records and cassettes along the way. And so like learning about the connections between, what players played on which albums and all this stuff, and hearing people's tones and how those all related, that part I was confident in, but the writing took a little while to get together, I think. And It's a great editor that can make you into a better writer, I think. So
that's interesting. You kind of came on Ableton's radar based on review of Ableton Live. Do you remember what version that was?
Yeah, I think it was Live 2 and or maybe Live 3. No, it was Live 4 is when MIDI came. Yeah, so it was definitely one of those two. And I think I was using it at the time and trying to piece it together with at the time I was trying to use Live as my only DAW, which is kind of a lot to ask of Live at that point in time, because it didn't have things like MIDI.
Right.
And I was using it rewired with Reason as my virtual instruments, and doing all this complicated stuff to get it to sync to my drummer on stage, and playing. I had a MIDI guitar and all these things that really can cause problems when you're playing in a live environment, I think.
Right.
And I just remember I had all this working. Live's tempo is following the drummers. All these things are going, and then the input jack on my guitar failed on my Strat. So the least
low tech comes to the rescue, huh?
So I had to play MIDI guitar through the rest of the show, and that was the last time I did that kind of thing, I guess.
Right. That's funny.
Yeah, so I think that got me into a place at Ableton where I began sort of demoing at NAMM and wearing a headset and showing off the features of Live. Mm-hmm. And through there, I wrote quite a bit. I ended up doing a lot of jobs as it was a smaller company back then. So editing, I edited all the Live 6 movies myself, and shot them all, and I did a lot of artist movies back then. So and thankfully our quality of our movies and artist relations has gotten much better since my days early on. I think it was the spinning head of Robert Henke in one of the videos that I snuck in that probably ended my time as the editor.
It sealed your fate, huh?
Yeah. But for a while I was the artist relations manager and business development manager. So when you see Live Light coming with a keyboard or a MIDI controller, that was my job for a long time, was making those deals. And and that, I think, that got me into the APC 40 role, because I worked closely with Akai Professional, and that kind of was a turning point for me, I think, was when Glenn Darcy sort of came to us and said, hey, here's an idea for an APC 40. We have to do this together. And we sort of looked at it and said, yeah, we need to do that together. And there were some ideas we had and some ideas they had, and we sort of merged these together into something that I think was a quite successful product and fulfilled a need for a lot of people for a long time.
Right. Yeah, frankly, I still use now it's a APC 20 is one of the controllers I use. I just got used to that particular control surface, and it's really hard for me to think of mixing in Ableton without that. I use the push for playing, and I use that for mixing. It's kind of a cool combo.
I mean, I have both here as well, they fulfill different needs for sure, and I mean, the fader, having dedicated faders and all this stuff is really it's great in combination with, I think of push as like it's the single track way of thinking. You're focused on what's happening in that track, and the APC 40 is like, how do you get to all your different ideas and launch them? And certainly for stage, it's useful to have all that dedicated control.
Through the relationships you developed as sort of like doing the bundling packages, it's kind of interesting how within the MI industry, how important are those relationships, do you think? Do you find that was something that opened doors for you a lot?
Yeah, I do, because it's a small industry that we work in, and there's a lot of turnover, and the people you talk with at one company, I guess you should always treat everybody nice, because they might show up at a different company next. And I think we've had there's painful negotiations and happy results and not so happy results, and in that way you kind of become close to these people that you work with, and I think in particular, in many ways, I was because I was in the U.S. and American and working with some American companies, I think it helped to have me as sort of a middle person to have the relationship between a German company and some of these American companies, where the cultures are frankly quite different, actually. And it helped to translate that, and I think I've tried to be honest with everybody we work with, and try to work on the end result and get to a good product together, and I think that worked out well. So
I want to talk a little bit about the development of the push. I'm a little fascinated by the push, because to me, I guess in retrospect, if you look at it, it probably was a natural evolution, but at the time it seemed revolutionary to me. The way that sort of a machine that was really purpose-built to be an extension of the software, right? I found it to be very different from the APC in the way I approached it as an interface, as a controller. And I think a lot of people did, right? It kind of took the world by storm. We started seeing them everywhere. Tell me a little bit about, first of all, how you made the decision you did to move in that direction, but also what were like the overriding values you were looking for when you were trying to make something like this?
So I think it started out as a, I guess I come from like the MPC 2000 early on, and a lot of drum machines and that sort of thing, and make hip hop, and so there's a workflows that I was coming with and artists I was talking to, and for me, I was like, I want something to really make my drum beats and sample and work with samples and make all this part easier to do with live and less clicking around with the mouse, and more fun way to make beats, the way it was with many of these drum machines. And we started in this direction and really like worked into the ideas that, of sort of combining the fun of playing drums and step sequencing drums and being able to quickly do all this stuff without, a lot of steps and without going to your computer a lot. And this was all, I think, going pretty well. And Gerhard came to me and said, you know what? This shouldn't just be for beats, though. This should be for everything. It's sort of one of these commandments you get from your boss, like, oh, man. And it's the worst when he's right, which he often is. And so sort of like, well, but we have this idea. We could just do this. And he's like, nah, let's just make it for everything. And so melody and harmony were added to the mix, which for me was a really fun challenge. And as I said before, this is like, well, I do have a degree in music theory, so maybe I can make some use of this. And I think just getting to the idea of quick ways to come up with music. I mean, I don't think like Push will never replace a piano for a person who studied piano. I mean, it's just not. It's not what it's for. I think right. You can start on it and you can get to a place where you can play with that kind of virtuosity. But it's not meaning to replace any of these other instruments. But what it can do is give you a quick way to get great musical ideas down, and this kind of came through trial and error. I mean, I think we for sure looked at plenty of other instruments. I mean, I think even like for Gerhard, I think his inspiration came from a bandoneon that he saw playing on the street, and he's like, "How does this thing work with all these buttons in this grid?" And we looked at everything from hexagonal buttons to all different orderings, and this is like really fun work to do, to go and investigate how other instruments work and these sort of strange equal temperament or odd temperament pianos that are out there, and all this stuff. And somehow through all this, there was at some point a eureka moment of just like of the way coming up with the layout the way that Push has it now. Then it was just sort of like tweaking it and trying to figure out which scales to add and all this stuff, which was just fun and challenging on the development side, I think, to make it all as fast and as fluid as it is. There's certainly a lot of influence from all kinds of other drum machines and step sequencers and the Monome and everything that people were hacking with the APC 40 as well. And this all came together, and it, I mean, then it was about sort of figuring out how big the buttons were and where we moved the buttons around. And I think there's some pictures on the internet you can find of our prototype of Push 1, which was a hacked together with. We used some of this Livid kit of buttons that you can get, the Livid Builder, and glued these to Legos, and then basically we're able to move all the buttons around until we found something that we liked.
Right.
And I have an account at the custom Lego ordering place where like Lego has this awesome, you can order Legos in any color and size, and those expense reports were a little tricky to justify. And also hearing my wife hearing me like digging through the Lego bin, is like, are you really working up there?
Right.
Or a lot of trial and error, and then you do everything exactly the way you want, and after Push 1 we're like, but we should have had a button here, and this one is a little bit, you learn these things as you watch users. And
I wanted to actually ask you about that, because you and I had an interesting conversation a while after the Push came out, where you were asking me about my use, and I was even sort of like bemoaning some things that I do from, because I think it's going to work away and it doesn't, and it kind of freaks me out and stuff like this, right? And you were actually very patient with me, letting me sort of like flail my arms. And then later I was thinking about it, and I was like, oh my God, you probably spent years of your life designing it exactly the way it was. And here I am like mewling about, the up arrow doesn't seem to do what I want. How frustrating is it to have to, first of all, come up with an idea that's going to be sealed in hardware, and secondly, then having to hear people complain about it or praise it. I mean, it's got to be nice to get praised for it too.
it's a little of all those things. And if I say the word button layout, like we literally had meeting titles that were like "Revenge of the Button Layout" and "The Button Layout Strikes Back," because that moment of like this is it, that's it. There's nothing more you can do, and well, we could change the silk screening on the buttons. That gives us another 2 months, and it's kind of like it's almost better when you make the decision because you just live with it and you can move forward. But I mean, it's never perfect, and you always first you don't satisfy everyone. So we really have to create an idea of who we're targeting and live with that and know that there's going to be people who are outside of that who it's not perfect for. But then we watch users just nonstop. I mean, we're always listening, and we watch big artists, we watch unknowns, we watch 18-year-olds, and we go and we travel and we go to their places and we see how they work. And I think there's definitely a big difference between like what somebody says and what they do in many of these cases. And I think, somebody can say, I wish it had a button like this and this. And we have a big picture of Homer's car from The Simpsons where he did everything for the last thing and put it up. And
Yeah, I remember.
We could, that's part of our job is to try to simplify what people want and reduce it to the elements that are most necessary. And then there's the challenge of like, what can you do in this amount of time to get it ready for release? And for sure, there's things that we leave on the table, and we're working on them. And I think we're doing a pretty good job, especially with Push 2, of adding these things now, so that there's still an ongoing upgrades to it as it lives and evolves.
On the business and even the design side of it, it probably did not seem like an evolution. It probably seemed like a reinvention. Because, first of all, Ableton's been very clear that this, unlike the Push 1, which was in collaboration with Akai, this is completely designed and manufactured by Ableton, right?
Yeah.
And so, to me, while it seems like you had a tough job, because for it to carry the Push name, you'd already established what a push is. So you couldn't really go completely back to the drawing board, right?
Yeah.
Or did you feel like you could have? I don't know. That's a question, I guess, more than a statement.
We could have, in that we re-engineered it from scratch. Like there's no commonality under the hood between this and Push 1, because we did it entirely anew. So there were some things we could do, some things we didn't want to do that we liked, some adjustments to things that we thought, hey, this isn't quite the way we wanted it to work from Push 1. But I guess the main difference overall is the display, which leads to, the display led to so many different changes for us in terms of like the technology. Like Push 1 is SysX that goes back and forth and to power the display and sends characters. And this is a different technology and requires a lot more work in live and Push and everywhere to run the display that we have.
Right.
That and the fact that because it's not a character display, we have the opportunity to use these buttons above and below the display to be labeled buttons. And that led to just a ton of functionality changes. But even more than that, to do that display, displays are like a cell phone run business, basically. Like if your display is the size of a cell phone, then you can get them for reasonable prices because they're selling millions of these things.
Yep.
But if you want a display like Push, it's going to cost you. So this is an extremely expensive part for a company of our size to use, and I think that was difficult to do. To be honest, it's like I don't know that we could do that in collaboration with another company and both make a profit on it.
Right.
And I think we were upfront with Akai about this. They understood, and it's not just that. I think it's. They were awesome to work with. They really helped us make we felt a home run with Push 1. But this is like such a massive portion of our company, of what we do, that it like to put the time into it that we need to put into it. I think it needed to be done by ourselves in-house.
Right. Well, it does make the point, which is there are certain things. There are certain things you can ask of a partner, and then at some point it gets to be too much, right? And what you don't want to do it sounds to me like one of the things y'all chose not to do is focus on compromise.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, in terms of the user that we target, in terms of like the cost of components, I mean, yeah, there's things that we didn't want to compromise on, and also the time we put into each of these things. Like, I think it would probably drive, or maybe it did. I should talk to the guys at Akai. It'll drive you crazy if you know the level of detail and obsession we take into each of the little aspects of it. Externally, you may say, it looks pretty much like Push 1, but not to us. I think there's many differences to it and nuances. It's fun to get into those details and probably a little frustrating at times, but I think there's certainly, you nailed it in terms of there's only so much you can ask a partner company of how much energy you can ask them to put into a product that isn't ultimately their product, I think. And yeah, that went into our reasoning for making it ourselves, which led us to having to learn how to source parts, how to get it built, and all these, and had to expand our hardware team and stuff like this. So this is all new territory for us, but luckily we had some great people to come on board, and a lot of people who learned new things to make this kind of thing happen.
I know for myself, the one time I was involved in sort of like manufacturing type stuff, it was on a much smaller scale. But even then, one of the things that we noticed was that an awful lot of manufacturing is driven by cell phone technology and cell phone manufacturing. And so as a result, if you're talking about tens or hundreds or even thousands of something, you just see an eye roll on the other side because they're used to churning out millions of things. And so then all of a sudden that scale level gets to be a real problem in terms of sourcing parts, making sure that suppliers will keep parts available, not end of life them too early, or even want to return your call if you're working at too small of a quantity,
Yeah, we faced all those problems for sure, and just finding a factory that was like the right size, the right cost, treated their workers the right way. I think finding all these things, we had quite a checklist of what we wanted. It's like a Goldilocks situation. Because if you're too small for the company, then you get overlooked by them. If you're too big for them, they're not going to be able to make your stuff in the right quantities, in the right timing. And that's been really exciting and fun actually to do that research. And there's many people who help us in this area too. Somebody like Roger Lynn has told me who he works with and helped me to figure out things to look for. But certainly our head of hardware, Oliver, is the Oliver Harms. He's the guy who got it made, I'd say, in many ways. He has knowledge of all the mechanical and electronical stuff that needs to go on, and is also speaks Mandarin, which doesn't hurt. So,
did you ever have electronics chops that you could mock stuff up? Were you involved ever in the electronic side of it, or did you always stay clear of that?
No, with Push 1, I put together what we called our Frankenstein. So, like, I have enough knowledge to solder and burn my fingers and incorrectly solder and have somebody else help me figure it out.
Have you seen that great T-shirt that's like, if it smells like chicken, then you're holding it wrong, and it shows a guy holding a soldering iron? I thought that was great.
No, that's good. I think there's some great YouTube videos on learning to solder correctly, and I advise anybody listening who has problems with soldering to watch these. They're great. So, yeah, so no, I'm not I don't know enough about it. I mean, I can solder by numbers basically, I'd say, and have a basic understanding, but not more in terms of like, I guess my job is more like in, hey, we wanted to do this, and okay, here's how much that's going to cost. So let's look at these parts and try to figure out that kind of stuff. So, uh, but yeah, it's interesting to me, and in the same way, I guess the software side is also interesting to me, but I don't really know much more than being able to poke around in a Python file a little bit. But I have a much better chance of breaking something than
Fixing.
fixing.
Well, so I'm curious now from your standpoint. At some point, someone had to say, well, what if we replace the character display of the Push 1 with a fully graphic display on the Push 2? I'm thinking that represents a, holy crap, we have to throw everything out the door and kind of start the whole thing from fresh, right?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, this was even something we wanted before Push 1. It just was like it came into like, well, you're not going to be able to find a display like that, and it's going to cost too much, and and the development time is going to be this many years, and it looked like something that just wasn't really possible at the moment. And
okay.
We kind of lucked into finding the right display at the right size. Like, I mean, when we found this display, we're like, wow, that's like the same exact width as the 8 pads going across. That's total luck. I mean, we didn't have this
Really?
custom built. We found it. So, but they're like, what's the end of life of that display exactly?
Yeah, right,
like we have to deal with all these kind of issues. And
well, so I'm curious then, how do you go through the process once you have like a completely new palette, right? Because that's what happens when you go from a character to a graphic display, your palette changes completely. What is it like doing that design? I mean, was it just like, well, we used to have kind of a graphic slider, let's do a curvy thing instead? Or how much did the user interface and the human interface change once you had this new palette? I mean, I'm asking all these design questions because quite frankly, I'm a little fascinated with design anyway. And especially when it comes to human-computer interface stuff. And quite frankly, I think the job that you did on the Push 2 was amazing because I noticed the existence of that display changed the way that I interface with the Push. I find myself diving into much greater detail than I normally would because not only is it, there's something about the display and the way that it's laid out and stuff that just draws me into detail, into levels of detail I never approached with hardware before. And so to me, that rings a great big bell that there's a design, some kind of design magic that occurred here. And so I'm asking a lot of design questions because I'm curious about that.
pretty easy. I just kind of threw it to get we there are many people involved in the design of Push 2 and especially the display. I mean, there's I mean, we work with external design agencies and I guess they probably would know better as to I mean, like my early drawings are for some of the functionality, like how we want to, where tracks are and where devices are on the display, and
right.
how you get into access more levels of a device, like an effect or an instrument. And so I'm sort of working on that functional side and giving these sort of gaudy Illustrator files to a design agency who's looking at it and saying, no, we're not going to use Comic Sans for this, and we're not gonna do it this way. Those colors are horrible, Jesse. And honestly, we had a lot of battles and hugs, and it took a long time to get to where we are. And I guess part of the way we do it is is try to come up with design guidelines for things we want to do. We don't want it to feel like a computer. I mean, that was a big thing for us, is we wanted it to be it accesses the same things that Live does in many ways, but we don't want it to feel like something that you have to click your mouse on, or something that feels like there's another button around the corner here that lets me get into Facebook.
Right.
We wanted this thing to sort of breathe on its own, and the use of color and lines and I guess probably our head of design would say that, one of our goals is to sort of reduce it as much as we possibly can and only add back in layers as needed to make people understand what's going on, I think. So there's many places where you could have had like a button with shadows behind it and things like that.
Wood grain or something, right?
Wood grain and chrome screws in different places, but it's really not our style. And
That's true.
But I think in the logic of how everything's laid out is partly tied to this layout of having buttons beneath and above and below the screen, and where the encoders are. And but yeah, we fought about every last detail of it, and the names of the buttons, add device versus add effect.
Right.
I'm going back to add effect now. I wish it was add effect. It's like you're having all these language questions and language, and then trying it out, and you argue on paper. We also do like clickable keynote mock-ups to show the way you get through these different modes and how you move around, and argue and put them in front of a lot of users and sort of synthesize what those users say. That's the main thing I think that we learn. We relearn it every couple months, is that we can theoretically say whatever we want and argue about it, but it all changes once you put it in front of 5 people, and then you're like, oh, right.
Of course. Yeah, right. So how do you when you're in the mock-up stage, how do you even put stuff in front of users? How can that even happen?
We sign a lot of people to NDAs, so they non-disclosure agreements, and we do this in many ways. From a cardboard mock-up of something to a mock-up that works. I think for push 2, we had a lot of things where we'd have a computer screen next to a push with a lot of black tape over the push 1. Push 2 was a little easier in that sense because we had something with pads that worked, but
sure.
Push 1 was this Frankenstein controller we put together that sometimes worked. There's a lot we do with Max for Live to do emulations.
Mm-hmm.
So for push 2, we have a virtual emulation we worked against for quite a while. So their developers could have it on their screen and press buttons that way. And I think somebody even hacked this and found it. That's why I can talk about it. So
I see.
And that's the challenge, I think, is with software you can continually evolve it, but with hardware at some point it's frozen. And that's I guess in an ideal world, you could update your hardware the way you can update your software, but I guess we're not there quite yet.
Not yet. So do you ever find situations where now, or do you feel like there are situations where the software might be stymied because there's so much hardware that's already out there that implies a certain thing? Or do you feel like in the case of Ableton that what the software does is already so well defined that you don't sweat that as much?
I don't think I sweat it so much, but maybe that's because I'm working on the hardware and not the software, I guess. But I sweat the software because I use it so much, I think. And for me, I don't think that our software has to be beholden to a MIDI controller from 12 years ago, but I think there's some universals that aren't going to change. I think there's knobs and faders and buttons and keys aren't going out of style anytime soon, I guess.
Right.
So I'd love to be open to new ways of control and interaction with the software, and that's all very exciting as well.
Yeah.
I'm a student of the old synthesizers. Like we've talked about this before, and there's still so much that all these old synths do that I love, and also that I hate. And I think that's a big part of learning about these stuff is like where I love failed synthesizer companies. Actually, that's my favorite kind to collect.
What's your favorite?
My favorite synth?
Yeah.
Well, and I wouldn't put this in the failed department at all, but I love the Oberheim stuff, like the expander, and I love the Fender Chroma Polaris, which is kind of there's this story, like there's the ARP Avatar, which kind of put ARP out of business, and I have an ARP Avatar. I love that. That's right in front of me, and but I find it somehow to be like it's a very easy synthesizer to get no sound out of. Like it's easier to get no sound than it is to get a sound, and I find that to be like I don't think that would pass through user testing these days.
Right.
However, it makes this is the chameleon bass sound, and like all these other incredible sounds came from this. But so the ARP Avatar put ARP out of business, and Fender bought them, and the result of that was the Chroma Polaris and the Chroma, and like I love these histories of sort of where these things went, and the Chroma Polaris is just bonkers. It's like there's things in there that I'm like, how did they end up with that way? But the sound is just fantastic, and I think there's a place for all these different interfaces. I love having different. I mean, I think that's the fun of synths and modular gears, that you can have a different interface to control similar things and come up with totally different results, and that's awesome and fun.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you talk about like, because you make a good point. It's almost like the very last synth that a company makes is either going to be horrible or crazy. So I think of like Ensoniq and the Fismo. I mean,
it's on my watch list.
Yeah, it's bizarre, man. I got a chance to mess with it, and it hurt my head. But it sounded like God on a stick. It was something else. So some of those last gasp synths really ended up being pretty amazing. And so it's kind of cool to think in those terms. Actually, one of the old failed synths that I really liked was the Kawai K5M, which
I just sold mine.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I just thought that they had such a cool, weird sound, and there was, at the time especially, there was nothing else approaching that sound. So it was really neat to play with.
Yeah, I love that. I love that synth, and I've used it a lot. And I just found that the interface, oh man, it just made me anything that I have to like pick up the manual to use, like if I haven't used it in like a month, then it's like and also I think for me, for that one, that sound is really an awesome sound, and it goes in great directions. But for me, like Push 2 made me use Operator again in a way that I hadn't in a while. And the additive synthesis possibilities on Operator are just fantastic, and this kind of made me realize I was like, I'm not using that one so much anymore. Yeah. Maybe I should downsize. I have a patch bay that's full at the moment, and it's a one in, one out policy right now, because I think if I need 2 patch bays, it's a problem.
Right. Yeah. You have to spank yourself every once in a while to keep that stuff in order.
Yeah. I mean, it is already a problem, I guess. So I don't get into modular.
Yeah. Well, good luck with withstanding that. Everybody I talk to that's not yet into modular, the next time I talk to them, are like, I'm in it now. It seems to be the virus that's going around at the moment.
Robert Henke told me, I was like, are you into modular stuff? He's like, I'm not a masochist. But the next time I talk to him, he's slowly going down that path. So
of course.
I don't know. You probably can't talk to him anymore, I guess. He's into lasers and modular. It's just over, I guess.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, I mean, when I saw he was going into lasers, I was like, well, pretty soon he's going to do his own family dentistry, because he's literally going backwards in time, right?
Totally, yeah.
Well, our time is pretty much up already. I can't believe it. But before we go, I'm going to ask you something, and you're probably going to be able to say I can't really talk about anything in specific, but I still want to ask you the question. What do you see for the future of hardware? I'm not necessarily talking about push-like hardware or controller hardware, but hardware in general. I mean, you, as part of your job when you were doing bundling, as part of your job designing this stuff, you've gotten a chance to get your hands on hardware of all sorts. I'm curious, what do you think the future direction of hardware is going to be? Because it seems like there's a renaissance of hardware right now anyway, but also a desire for people to be hardware focused. I'm curious to think what you think about the future.
I mean, good question. That's exactly what I think about all the time. And I mean, I guess we can think back to, I try to look backwards and forwards, seeing where these things changed. And I think there's certainly this point of like where MIDI changed things and where computers came into the studio and then slowly replaced the studio. And then now it seems like we're back into this area of like modular gear and analog synths are back. And there's something about like, I mean, I think we all had a moment with the like Minority Report of like, oh, well, someday none of this will exist and we'll just put our fingers in the air and wave our hands around. But there's that, the hand on the knob and the hand on the fader and the finger on the key, these aren't going away, I don't think, and I don't think they should. I mean, there's a lot that touchscreens and virtual reality can give us, and they will give us, and I'm sure that'll affect the way that we all interact with our studios at some point in the future. But I don't think that the tactile part is going away, and so I'm wondering, how can we make that better, and how can we evolve that into a place that's beyond where it is today. I think that's all super interesting and consumes my my thinking in many ways.
Indeed. Well, thanks, Jesse, so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us. It's great getting a chance to chat with you anyway, but it's also really cool to kind of talk about all of the processes that you've gone through with everything. So thanks a lot and have a great day.
Thank you.
Just want to say thanks again to Jesse for spending a little bit of time with me, kind of going over developments from his seat. Always great to talk to him. Can't wait the next time we go out for dinner or something. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you have a great weekend. If you're hanging out with family, good on you. If not, chill out, lay back, enjoy it, and I'll catch you next week. Bye.